I'm going to be joined by our first guest, John Rentoul, who is a fantastic chief political commentator for The Independent, who I'm sure is going to tell me why I've been overly excited and perhaps wrong on what I've seen today. John, how are you?
Hello, Jonathan. No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I disagree with everything he said. I mean, you were wrong to say that he didn't mention immigration, because he did. That was in the speech.
But it's not one of the milestones, is it, John?
It's not one of the. It's not one of the milestones. It's not in the document, but it was in the speech, and it was very clear that he said we want to reduce immigration, legal and illegal, because that's what working people want.
And I will say this, John, as well.
Sort of distancing himself from it. He was sort of saying, it's not what I want, but it's what the working people of this country want. So
and what I will say, John,
I'll give it to them.
Any Conservative who wants to pipe up about this should be careful, because our record was an unmitigated disaster in office, which is why Kemi Badenoch was so keen to avoid talking about it at PMQs yesterday, and why people like me, as you know, John, who used to sit on the backbenches of the governing party at the time, frothing at the mouth over not going far enough in immigration, ultimately paid the price, and we've seen Reform able, obviously, to eat into that lead. But, John, can I just quickly ask you, why have we got this big speech today? Was this something that had to happen, or was this something that was always planned to happen?
It's been planned for some time, but it was very strange, I have to say. It was weird to see what was in effect a manifesto launch. I mean, if you hadn't been paying attention, you would have turned your television on and you would have thought there's an election campaign underway. That petition for an immediate general election has obviously been successful, and the Prime Minister is running an election campaign against those fools who've been running the country for the past 5 months and not doing anything. There was such a contrast between his sense of urgency and saying that he's got this huge, ambitious project, really dangerously ambitious, to transform the country. If you contrast that with the past 5 months of sort of dithering and indecision, it sounded like a completely different person.
Well, I saw in the Daily Mail there was the report about, what is it, we've got 67 or something reviews now, or being undertaken, nearly one for every other day that the Labour Party have now been in power. It does feel a little bit like decision-making is being kicked down the road, and ultimately to govern is to choose. And sometimes, as Keir Starmer has done on a few things, you have to make the unpopular decisions, but sometimes delaying and deferring those decisions can actually hit you down the road when ultimately you're presented with ideas that will cost money, and Rachel Reeves is then going to have to find the money to fund those ideas, and where she's already said the budget will be quite tight going forward and she does not want to come back to take extra money. Do you think, from the British taxpayer that is, do you think that Starmer has been clever with this, in the sense that he hasn't given masses of specific detail of how to measure success, therefore he will have the flexibility to be able to demonstrate he has achieved the goals he set out today?
Yeah, I think you're right. They're fairly cautious, apart from the one that you mentioned at the start, the decarbonisation. I mean, as you say, that's not achievable at a reasonable cost, which is why I think it'll just be quietly forgotten. And in a way, I think they can get away with that, because people will say, "Oh, well, they tried, and green is good, but I don't want to pay for it." So they can quietly forget that one. I mean, the important ones are living standards, the NHS, and immigration, as you say. And immigration isn't one of the the milestone targets, but I think Keir Starmer does recognise that it's important. And I think the point of the speech was not to appeal to the public. I mean, the public would have been completely baffled if they turned on their television accidentally and caught any of that. And it's not for the journalists, because I mean the journalists are only interested in picking holes in all this. It was about sending a message to the civil service. It was about saying, I'm serious about this. I want you to get on with it.
Well, I saw, John, a very interesting quote from, it says a number 10 insider. I actually suspect it will likely be someone close to Morgan McSweeney, if not Morgan himself, who obviously has taken over from Sue Gray, that Dom Cummings was right all along when it came to the bureaucratic machine getting in the way of delivering in the interest of the British people. I think if I see one thing, it's quite obvious that Keir Starmer has clearly looked at what's happened in the United States of America from the Donald Trump-Kamala Harris election and realised that you have to almost demonstrate you are for the people against the establishment, and you're willing to rip up the establishment in order to deliver change, which I think, let's be honest, Nigel Farage and Reform are the natural-looking disruptors, and now it's up to Keir Starmer to paint himself as the man willing to do that.
Yeah, but, this is the former DPP, Sir Keir Starmer. The establishment sort of runs in his veins. I mean, he's just a bureaucrat and an administrator. And for him to pose as some kind of iconoclast who's going to tear down the system in a sort of Dominic Cummings way is not going to work. And actually, it's going to be counterproductive, because there's a couple of lines in that speech that if I were a civil servant watching it, I would have taken offence at. I mean, the idea that he said a lot of people in Whitehall just enjoy being in the tepid bath of managing decline. I mean, that is a terrible thing to say about your civil service, who you are expecting to deliver for you on all this thing. And he talked about the plan for change is going to land with a thud on desks across Whitehall like a gauntlet. I mean, so when civil servants come in, on their one day in the office, working from home, they're going to find a glove on their desk and a challenge to do something about it.
Well, John, actually, if you don't mind, we'll quickly go to a clip of Keir Starmer where he's actually talking about his values in the speech that he gave earlier today, and we can respond to that.
How do we project our values, fight for our values, show our strength in an ever more volatile world, but also to show to the British people that their country can still do great things? And to be honest, not just great things, things that they should be able to take for granted, the basic functions of the state. Now,
there is Keir Starmer and talking about his values. Now, I got to know Keir Starmer a little bit during my time in Parliament, and I will say this for him. I don't think he's a bad chap. I actually think he's a good person. I think he's going to be a useless Prime Minister, because ultimately he is too willing to sit on fences. If you look at the 2019 general election, he was all too willing to do that when it came to the idea of whether or not to deliver Brexit, have a second referendum, yes or no. And I think we've seen the same when he's come into government. 67 reviews. The Conservative Party fell into this exact same trap when we were in government, which meant that nothing was getting done. When you're in government, you have to make brave and bold decisions. The British public are crying out for change. He's bang on the money when it came to using that word in the election, but change has got to be something that has not been seen in this country. Look at Argentina with President Milei and what he's doing to the Argentine economy. Look at Donald Trump, the disruptor to the swamp over in Washington, D.C. Look at Nicolas Bukele in El Salvador, who's done some quite extraordinary things on crime. You have to think bold, you have to think big, you have to think outside of the box. I want to give a big thank you to John, who obviously joined us, and sorry that I think we've cut off there a bit earlier than expected. Oh, no, sorry, John, you're still there. Sorry, my team behind the glass of Tommy, I didn't see you on my screen. Apologies, John. I thought you'd gone, that's why I was ranting.
I was listening to your Trumpian rant.
Your Trumpian rant, there you go. Well, John, sorry, we've talked about Sir Keir Starmer's values. Like I said, I think he's a good man. I have serious questions about his ability to actually deliver change, because ultimately I think he is too much of a lawyer, if I'm perfectly frank, too much of a dither and a delayer. I think that someone like Wes Streeting is sitting there quietly, and I think he'll be the real tour de force of the Labour Party that the Conservatives, Reform, Greens and Lib Dems will have to face in the future. But do you think, with the team around him now, Morgan McSweeney in the driving seat behind him as the number two, Rachel Reeves and him, who obviously formed a very strong bond, that Keir Starmer has the grit, has the determination, has the fight in him to deliver the change, and perhaps people like me will be proven wrong, and therefore we'll see a very different electoral prediction to what some polls are trying to show today, 4 years away from a general election?
well, have you seen that poll today that shows Reform ahead of the Labour Party? I mean, that is absolutely extraordinary. You've got three parties on 26, 24 and 23%. I mean, it's just amazing. But yeah, no, does Keir Starmer have the grit to fight back? I mean, yes, he may well do, but does he have the people in place? Does he have the right policies to deliver the change that the public need? And I'm much more sceptical about that, and I'm still quite sceptical after watching that speech. I mean, Morgan McSweeney is obviously a genius at running election campaigns, and he is taking that old sort of Clintonian view that you've got to run a government like a permanent election campaign. So that's why today looked like a manifesto launch. But you've also got to deliver. And you've got to deliver change through the civil service. And I'm not sure that today's speech was the best way of doing that.
What's the mood, John, from you gauge from the backbenchers on the Labour Party? I think one thing I will say for these Labour members of Parliament who aren't in the government, they've certainly learnt the lesson of the Tory Party over the last 4.5 years, which is discipline is absolutely vital. And even if it's some bitter pills to swallow, infighting publicly is not going to end up winning you elections. We know divided parties lose elections. But are there any signs of jitters, in your opinion? Or do you think the line is still holding firm?
Yeah, no, there are jitters, definitely. But you are quite right. They understand the need for discipline. and they are generally a very prepared to keep their heads down and stay united. But I mean, these are early days. I mean, we're 5 months away from a general election. I mean, if the party really were tearing itself apart now, then it would be in even bigger trouble. So who knows what it's going to be like if Keir Starmer can't turn it around. But I mean, he's got time. That's the one thing. He's got a huge majority. He's got 5 years, and it'll be a long time before we can be certain that he's making a mess of it.
Well, I do keep saying, John, that for any opposition party, including the Conservatives, that they should be very mindful of the fact that, like you say, circumstances can change. It might feel it's all good to have an election today. It ain't happening today. It ain't happening next week. It ain't happening in May. It's going to be, as you say, I'm guessing May 2028. It could well go into May 2029. And ultimately, it'll be those circumstances. What is the state of the economy? What is the state of the NHS? What is the state of neighbourhood policing? And if those things have improved, if those things have got better, then believe me, the Conservative Party is in for a rough ride. So don't believe all your chickens have come home to roost, opposition parties, is all I'd say, because a lot can change. But John, can I just say thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to speak to you as always.